It's all quiet in the underground bunker. Doors closed, locks bolted. But the Great One isn't just resting on his laurels. He's making sure your weekend is even better by giving you his best. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Two big stories, actually 3 or 4 tonight. But I want to deal with this trial, so-called, and I want to deal with Iran. But first, what I just posted, and I want to elaborate on this. Obviously, I wasn't in the Manhattan courthouse, but I was listening carefully to what lawyers who I trust from Fox were saying through texts and emails to the reporters who in turn were reading them on the air, as well as those who were watching in the courthouse and spoke directly in front of the courthouse. This judge is a disgusting fraud who has his foot on the defense lawyer's throat while he allows the prosecutor to ramble on in every direction, including, only now, about federal campaign finance laws and personal insinuations against Donald Trump, as well as suggestions that Cohen's actions can now be inferred onto Trump. That is unconstitutional, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care. And how could you tell, ladies and gentlemen? Because Robert De Niro, who is an unhinged madman head case, was there during the closing arguments making his Genghis Khan speech. And Biden, through reporters, has announced that he's going to give a formal presidential speech after this trial is over. Clearly a violation of campaign laws, number one. Number two, clearly trying to pretend he's presidential. And let me just remind you of this. To me, the Trump campaign has one major point to make. Joe Biden cannot fix what he broke. And Joe Biden will not fix what he broke. Whether it's inflation, whether it's the border, whether it's our relationship with Israel, whatever it is, Joe Biden broke it, and he won't fix it. That's why Biden has to go. But let me go on. So he prevents a federal campaign expert, one of the greatest in the country, from testifying, does the judge. This federal campaign issue didn't come in until closing arguments. It's not even in the bill of particulars on the indictments. So that's, there's so many violations of rules of evidence, of due process, the federal and state constitutions, and so forth. I can't even list them all. If the claim is he violated a federal campaign law, which law? What's the citation? There's none. And we have Stormy Daniels, who was used to embarrass Trump and spew her hate, nothing more. Michael Cohen, who lies whenever he opens his big mouth. He's the lead state witness. That's how preposterous this entire case is. And it is. Now, did you know the Access Hollywood tape was played today? For what? I'll tell you what in a minute. Tell you exactly what's going on here. None of this is relevant. It's all intended to create anger and hate against Trump by the jurors, which is an abomination. This character assassination under cover of a so-called justice system is pure Stalinism. One can only imagine what kind of jury instructions this guy's going to direct the jury to follow tomorrow. Meanwhile, to underscore the political nature of all this, as I said, there's Biden's campaign use of Robert De Niro, a foul-mouthed madman. And the White House, of course, as I said, they've announced that Biden's going to give a presidential address. Now, as a result of left-wing groups, well, first, let's remember this. This is a non-case. No crime, federal, state, or local. Just like the phony financial case. The state misdemeanor having to do with corporate reporting was not violated. The non-disclosure agreement was a legal expense and reported as a legal expense. The misdemeanor statute had already ran anyway. As a result of left-wing groups filing a complaint with the FEC, claiming the non-disclosure agreement was an illegal federal campaign contribution, the FEC said it was not. As if that wasn't enough, the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, took another look at the case. It dropped it. Indeed, it was Cohen who agreed to committing a list of federal crimes, including perjury. The former Manhattan DA looked at it, Vance, and he dropped it. Bragg originally blew it off, but when one of Biden's henchmen was sent to New York to work on the non-fraud fraud case and then moved to the non-crime criminal case, it was taken up. Then this preposterous theory was concocted. Well, the state misdemeanor statute can be revived if the NDA can be said to have covered up another crime. In this case, a federal campaign violation, which they hid throughout the trial. And their key witness, Cohen, of course. The DA has no jurisdiction over federal campaign matters. The FEC in Southern District of New York do have jurisdiction, but refuse to bring charges. So there was no federal campaign violation. That's why the judge refused to allow Brad Smith, former chairman of the FEC and federal campaign law expert, to testify for the defense as an expert witness, who would have fired a fatal legal torpedo into the DA's case. As he said on 3 different occasions on Life, Liberty, and Levin, there was no federal election crime, which is precisely why the judge wouldn't let the jury hear from him. And, of course, there's a lot more. I'd be here all day. The so-called judge in this case, Juan Merchan, is what we used to call a hanging judge. That is, the trial process is nothing more than a formality. In the end, nothing can be said, no evidence can be presented, no witness can alter, and no injustice can prevent the preordained outcome demanded by the judge. At least that's the judge's intent and goal. Remember, at the crux of all this, this is the key. There has been no evidence that Trump violated federal election law, let alone did so with intent and for which there's no reasonable doubt. That's the test to revive the state law. The state law cannot be revived without proving this. They proved nothing. They didn't even raise it during the trial because they didn't want the defense to have an opportunity to shoot a hole through it. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? My hope is there's at least one juror with the smarts, the guts, and the conscience who cuts through this static, the collateral evidence, the judge's misconduct, and says no to Merchan, no to Bragg, no to the Biden regime, and no to this horrendous tyranny. Now, this judge was not chosen by a lottery. He was chosen by another Democrat, the top judge in that particular jurisdiction. He's not a permanent judge. He's an acting judge. But he was chosen for a reason. This prosecutor, Bragg, has 34 counts. And technically, if Trump were found guilty of all of them, he'd be spending about 120 years in prison. He piled on where there was no case. Every invoice he used, every document he could find, he created an indictable offense, an indictable offense, an indictable offense. And yet they hid the ball. As I said, the New York State statute had run the statute of limitations. In other words, it was dead. It is a misdemeanor statute for a corporation. If you put down an expense in one category versus another, but even there you need to intend to do so. Trump didn't put down anything. It was done by others. And a non-disclosure agreement is a contract, hence rationally a legal expense. But Mark, it's a business expense too. They're one and the same for the purposes of the corporation. That's the bottom line. If he put it down as a business expense, they would have said he should have put it down as a legal expense. The point is, it's all transparent. He put it down where? In a public filing. It's in a public filing. He didn't hide anything. Or even more to the point, the accountants didn't hide anything. And so I asked Judge Merchan, what federal statute are you talking about under the campaign law? Which one? Cite it. If you're charged with a crime, you have a right to know what the hell you're charged with. Which one? We don't know. Who gets to decide that? A state judge? No. A city prosecutor? No. A New York jury? No. None of them. The FEC? Yes. The U.S. Attorney's Office? Yes. They didn't charge. There's nothing here. This 6-week trial has been nothing but an in-kind contribution to the Biden campaign. That's it. By the Democrat Party in New York. It's an in-kind contribution. A freebie. They bring out all the trash on Trump, the Stormy Daniels, the Michael Cohen, the National Enquirer, all the allegations, all the character assassinations reported day in and day out, day in and day out. You have a Stalinist judge sitting there who's both dumb and corrupt. Gee, that's never happened before. Well, look at the Old South and the judges there. Look all over the world. You've got them all over. Kangaroo courts, star chambers. Certainly can happen in America. It's happening right now, right in front of our eyes. That's what's happening. And then, of course, in these fascist and Marxist or autocratic regimes, they have their press. So they have their Jake Tappers. They have their CNN and their MSNBC dutifully reporting just as they want. And that's what we have today. Joe Biden's in trouble. He's destroyed our economy. He's destroying our currency. He's destroyed citizenship in our border. He's destroyed our schools. He's destroying our industries. He says, I've done more for union. No, you've done more to unions than you have done for unions. He's destroyed energy independence. He's a one-man wrecking ball. He's an arsonist. That's what he is. In our country, in Israel, other countries, what does he have to point to? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He's got 8 electric vehicle chargers in the whole country for $500 million, Mr. Producer. Or whatever the amount was. Maybe it was $1 billion, $2 billion. So what the prosecution, let me put it this way, what the Democrat Party's doing through Bragg and through Merchan is they are throwing everything against the wall. Anything that will convince a juror not to like Trump and to vote guilty. Anything. Whether it's the Stormy Daniels allegations, whether it's the Michael Cohen allegations, whether it's the National Enquirer guy, whether it's this, whether it's that, doesn't matter. And then we have 34 state statute violations, and now they bring up the all-important federal offense, and there's nobody there to challenge it because they bring it up in their closing argument, and they go last. The defense can't even challenge it. The judge won't even allow them to challenge the fact that it's raised. He keeps dropping the hammer on them over and over and over again. So, we have to hope there's at least one juror, maybe one of the lawyers, but if they're predisposed to Biden and to destroying Trump, well, then that's where we'll be.
Mark Levin.
Making your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Rashida Tlaib, as Mike Lawler, who we had on the program from New York, put it, should be removed from Congress immediately. Associating with and speaking before groups that are funded by U.S. designated terrorist organizations is disqualifying. And he's referring to this post by OSINT Defender. And it happens to be true. There is a video of this. A sitting member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib, was a speaker yesterday, 2 days ago, at the People's Conference for Palestine, which was funded and supported by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a communist terrorist group which is headquartered in the Syrian capital of Damascus. The group has been designated a foreign terrorist organization by the United States, Japan, Canada, and the European Union. Yet a member of the House of Representatives thought it would be a good idea to speak at a conference which was promoted by this group. Ladies and gentlemen, what is it going to take for us to get our country back? She's obviously, remember when she had a map in her office that didn't have the state of Israel? Remember the river to the sea? She was chanting that stuff, and she's obviously not a representative of the United States. She represents Hamas, Hezbollah, the PLO, the Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, Students for Justice in Palestine, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a communist terrorist group. I mean, that's who she represents. And she's not alone. Omar and others. You see, the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, I really want you to think about it. The Democrat Party has decided that this is part of their base. They've decided that the imams and the River to the Sea crowd in Dearbornistan, Michigan, are part of their base. They decided that the Hitler Youth on our college campuses, supported by the tenured Islamist Nazis and Marxists, are part of their base. And you even see radical left-wing Jews embrace this. Schumer is a perfect example. Bernie Sanders is more than a perfect example. I've explained all this over the months. In fact, I think it was even in part of the best of, wasn't it, Mr. Producer? I think so. That we played yesterday. And, of course, we have Blinken, Sullivan, the other reprobates at the Department of State, the National Security Council. We have an individual who is an activist for the Students for the Liberation of Palestine, which, of course, is a Marxist/Islamist front group supported by Hamas. What do you think of that? So I'm wondering if the Republicans in the House are going to get behind this movement to expel her. Not to reprimand her, not to censure, to remove her. When I first came into the Reagan administration, I was, how old was I? 23 years old, give or take? I'd graduated law school, I think it was 22, something like that, 23 or so. I went into the Reagan administration. And we had an FBI background check. FBI. And it took months. And they wanted to know everything. Everything. And you fill out the paperwork. And if you were deceiving or misleading or just flat out lying, you filled that out under the penalty of perjury. And there were questions about your associations with different groups. And they wanted to know if you were a communist. They wanted to know if you were a terrorist. They wanted to know if you spoke at certain types of groups or received honorarium or did legal work or did whatever it was. They wanted to know so they knew what they were dealing with. You want a position in the federal government. There's a few thousand so-called political or non-career positions that an administration that appoints individuals, and they want to know because you are to take an oath. I did take an oath to support the United States of America. Seems like it's a long time. It seems awfully quaint now, doesn't it, Mr. Producer? How would half the Biden people ever get appointed? How would half the Obama people ever get appointed? How would Obama even become president, given his associations with communists and Islamists? But there you have it. That's the Democrat Party. So the Democrat Party has fundamentally transformed our country. And we're in the middle of it right now. Who would have ever thought a president of the United States would be pressuring our allies not to rebuke the Islamist, mass-murdering, genocidal, American-hating regime from getting a nuclear weapon and aiming them at us? And yet that's what Biden's doing. Who would have ever thought we have a president of the United States that's actually funding our enemy? Funding our enemy. Not just appeasing it, funding it. Who would have thought? And yet there he is. And yet still you have numbskulls in your families, friends, associates, politicians, mental cases like De Niro, real head case. That Biden has to get elected to protect us from a dictator. You know the BS. It's shocking. And here we have Tlaib, and she'll get elected over and over and over and over again. But Congress has a responsibility, both houses, to police their members. Now, what is worse? What is worse? Tlaib and her affiliations with and support for terrorist organizations? Or some congressman illegally using a few stamps, Mr. Producer? If you find a member of Congress that's using stamps paid for by us to send notes to his wife, I love you, honey, it's Mother's Day, they're up on charges in the House. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying, how about some perspective and priorities here? How about it? Well, how about it? So Mike Lawler is correct. And I'm hoping the Freedom Caucus will get involved. Will they? Will you, boys and girls? I'm hoping all Republicans in the House will unite and demand her expulsion. Not because she's Palestinian. No. Because she's Hamas. Because she's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a terrorist group. If there were a Republican who spoke at a neo-Nazi group or a Klan organization, it was constantly voting against the rights of black people, or resolutions condemning those who are discriminating against black people, do you think that Republican would be praised and embraced by the Republican Party? No, they'd kick their ass out. Why does Biden praise her? She's scum. Why? Tlaib should be expelled. Congress belongs to us, the American people. Not one district in the country, to the whole country. I think we've tolerated this long enough, don't you, America? And any member of the House who comes on this show in the future, I'm going to ask them if they will support expelling Rashida Tlaib for who she associates with, who she supports, and who she represents. No. Not the people in old Conyers district. No. Hamas. Hezbollah. The PLO. The Muslim Brotherhood. CARE, which was created by Hamas. Oh, yes. How is it that they get away with what they get away with in our country? Why don't they shut CARE down? Don't give me this free speech crap. They're the enemy. We know this thanks to the FBI. We know it because of the wiretapped meeting at a Marriott hotel outside the Philadelphia International Airport. They said what they were going to do. Create CARE. A front group. Claims to be a civil rights group. When are we going to protect ourselves as a country? When we throw Biden out and elect Trump. That's when we'll protect ourselves as a country. When you appoint somebody to Department of Homeland Security that goes through these student visas and sees who's here and who shouldn't be here. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation does its actual job, which is to kick these terrorist bastards out of this country, from wherever they come, regardless, to secure the border. The Democrats want to do everything possible for you to forget what it was like under Trump. The economy, until the pandemic hit, the border, support for our military, a sound dollar, peace in the Middle East, China and Russia wetting themselves. They dare not move while Trump is president. NATO getting a tongue lashing from Trump and increasing their spending, which they were supposed to do in the first place. I mean, you look at all of it. Constitutional judges. Nikki Haley runs around like she's God's gift. Nikki Haley wouldn't even be on the national scene but for Trump. Chris Christie, a failed presidential candidate twice. Republicans don't want him. Trump takes him under his wing, and of course, Chris Christie stabs him in the back. There's a lot of those ilks around. But the fact is, here's the truth. Donald Trump was a more conservative president, even though he's not ideological about it. He views it as common sense, and that's good. I'm much more philosophical about it, but if we get to the same place 98% of the time, what's wrong with that? Trump loves the country. Trump was more conservative as a president than Bush 43 or Bush 41. Which is why so many of the Bushies hate his guts. He was much more conservative than Bush 43 or Bush 41. In fact, he was much more conservative than Richard Nixon, who did some very good things, by the way, but very poor things domestically as well. Maybe I'll do a show on him one day if people care, but nonetheless, Trump's more conservative than Mitch McConnell and the Senate leadership. It's the truth. Trump's the most conservative president we've had since Ronald Reagan. And we've really only had 3 substantively conservative presidents, really, the last century and the beginning of this century. Calvin Coolidge, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump. That's the truth. Go back to McKinley, perhaps. Taft, somewhat. Theodore Roosevelt, no way. Theodore Roosevelt was a national progressive. He ran on the Progressive Party as a third-party candidate, Bull Moose Party. He used to write pieces that appeared in the New Republic. I know all about him. People tout him. McCain used to tout him, which is about right for those two. He wasn't horrible. He wasn't Woodrow Wilson, but he wasn't a conservative. Coolidge. Reagan. Trump. Those are the 3 conservatives in the last 120, 125 years, give or take. Truthfully.
Mark Levin.
You're listening to the best of Mark Levin.
Well, this is how the Democrats work. Donald Trump, in a Stalinist-like so-called trial, and Sam Alito, because his wife flew 2 flags, or maybe she flew one and he flew one, they're demanding that he recuse himself as they character assassinate him, as they have character assassinated Clarence Thomas, as they've character assassinated Neil Gorsuch. And the list goes on and on and on, because we're not dealing with a normal American political party. The Democrat Party hates America. And it will do whatever it has to do, including destroy our institutions, our traditions, our comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, and, of course, the Constitution to get what it wants. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how to put this without sounding the wrong way. First of all, I want you to know President Trump will be on the program at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. He was supposed to be on the program last evening, but obviously the bloviating Stalinist prosecutor couldn't shut the hell up in front of the jury, so we moved it to today, which was always one of the options. So President Trump will be on the program at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Come hell or high water, he'll be here. You know, I've spent, how old am I? Well, I've spent a long time, let me put it that way, 40 years, give or take, on constitutional issues, on constitutional litigation, debating it, studying it, analyzing it, diving as deep as the water allows me to go. And it is, in fact, very interesting, very informative to listen to the lawyers on TV. The defense lawyers, the former federal prosecutors, even some professors. But there's something missing. I say there's something missing. And what's missing is the lack of the same kind of tenacity, the same kind of motivation to win these battles. I don't mean just to analyze them at a relatively surface level or to, what's the jury say? Well, I used to watch their eyes and their mouth and whether they got up and had to go to the restroom or... Got it. It's all very interesting to me. Very. But what do we do about all this? And they'll tell you they don't know. There'll be an appeal, they'll tell you. But it'll take time. And in the meantime, Donald Trump will be wearing a scarlet letter on his forehead. Exactly what the Democrats want, to take 2, 3, 4, 5% of the vote. A convicted felon, that's Biden. That's what his campaign says they're going to call Trump if this jury convicts him on one of 34 preposterous counts. The whole thing's a setup. The fix is in. And so you'll hear the lawyers go on about this, and they'll say the instructions are horrendous for a variety of reasons, and they're correct. They'll say that this is the greatest judge for the prosecution, even though I was a former prosecutor, I've ever seen. And they're correct. And they will say the judge's instructions to the jury not to infer Trump's guilt from Michael Cohen's pleas is correct, even though the judge throughout kept connecting the two. Great point. I agree 100%. And for 1,000 other reasons. This case has been one manipulation after another. To what end? To interfere with this election. To get a conviction on anything. Anything. Maybe it's a tax issue. Maybe it's an invoice. Anything. Just one. Just one. Because by the time the appellate process in New York, Democrat judges and so forth and so on hear the case, maybe they'll even rule for Trump, it's too late. And they now have no answer to this. What do we do? What do we do? I posted something that my friend Arthur Ferguson, fantastic lawyer, had said not that long ago. And I posted it, and then I've added to it effectively. I've added to it effectively. And I see our friend Brett Baer is using it on TV. Good for him. Somebody, finally. In Bush versus Gore, the United States Supreme Court interceded in the Florida Supreme Court's deliberations, because that court was changing the Florida voting system on the fly, thereby violating the equal protection rights of Florida voters. The state court was establishing new standards for resolving a presidential election. The Manhattan trial court has done worse. In the farcical hush money case, it has taken up a case in which there is exclusive federal jurisdiction involving the federal election campaign, despite the fact that the federal agencies with authority over enforcing federal campaign laws, that is the Federal Election Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, declined to bring charges. Judge Juan Merchan is conflicted. His daughter, Lauren, is raising tens of millions of dollars on behalf of her Democratic Party clients. Collateral evidence has been abundant and has no probative value. The opposite. The elements of the supposed federal offense were never articulated by the state or the court. The imposition of a gag order on the defendant, who's the future Republican nominee for president during a national campaign, raises all manner of First Amendment questions, problems, and concerns. Moreover, this state court could easily have avoided influencing and interfering with the federal presidential election. This is from the Blaze that published it. Merely by setting a later time for the case if the court actually believed it somehow had merit. After all, the state waited years to bring it. Therefore, there's not only a federal constitutional equal protection violation in that this state trial court has purposefully interposed itself into the federal presidential election without authority or jurisdiction, but the court has also violated the federal constitutionally protected due process rights of the future Republican nominee for president. And the voters are to determine the federal election outcome without the interference of a state court attempting to influence the result. If President Trump is found guilty of any of the 34 charges, I would strongly encourage his attorneys to seek an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court based, at least in significant part, on Bush versus Gore. Now, I've added online the following. In Bush versus Gore, 5 justices agree that there was an Equal Protection Clause violation in using differing standards of determining a valid vote in different counties, causing an, quote, unequal evaluation of ballots in various respects. As I said earlier, here it is actually worse. To crystallize even further, here we have a state court acting without jurisdiction, influencing a federal presidential election by, among other things, preventing the putative GOP nominee from campaigning, meaning hundreds of thousands of voters at rallies, draining resources from the campaign to legal expenses, etc. That is, handicapping Trump and the GOP, thereby causing, quote, an unequal, unquote, federal election playing field. And in doing so, the state court has eviscerated the candidates' due process rights in a host of ways. No need to list them here. There's a very famous attorney who doesn't accept this. And I posted this. An attorney who argues against my prior post regarding Bush versus Gore essentially asserts that the jury might convict based on tax law or false invoices, but not a constitutional issue. Further, he argues that if the judge stays sentencing during appeal, there would be no reason for the court to take up the case. I find this all the time, that these guys totally miss the point. And I write, unfortunately, this misses the point entirely. This would not be an appeal based on the jury's choice for conviction. It would be based on the actions and process used by the state court and the prosecutor, that is the state of New York, to get a conviction. That is, to interfere with a free and fair election. That is the purpose of all the manipulation and absurd rulings from the state court on behalf of the prosecution. Now, you've heard them say this for weeks, but they don't put 2 and 2 together. The state appellate process has nothing to do with this as a federal constitutional matter. In fact, it would just further delay an ultimate resolution up the state chain. And I'm saying that process is the problem. And, of course, the urgency of the High Court, the Supreme Court of the United States, taking up the case quickly seems obvious. That is, every day that passes, this unconstitutional state interference has an impact on the federal election. Now, it is impossible to predict what the High Court would do, including whether it would take on this case. But that's always the situation. I'm simply paving a possible road to the Supreme Court if that is a preferred route, and I think it is. So to put even a finer point on it, the rebuttal is, well, what if they convict on a state tax issue? Or what if they convict on the state financial issue, reporting issue? Well, first of all, that reporting issue would be dead altogether, as they keep saying on TV correctly. It had a 2-year statute of limitations, so you need at least an inference of some kind of federal law, federal election law in this case, they argue, with great ambiguity. But that misses the point, too. I said Bush versus Gore, where they changed the voting system in county after county after county, and the Supreme Court of the state kept changing the voting system for the state over and over and over again. And finally, the United States Supreme Court steps in, stops the Florida Supreme Court, and says what? It doesn't say what I argued, even though Scalia and Thomas and I agreed, which was this is a violation of the election process where the state legislature has authority and the state Supreme Court is rewriting the law. As the Chief Justice, then, of the Florida State Supreme Court indicated, in order to get a majority, they wound up with a 7-2 vote. The majority, the other 5, joined by Scalia and Thomas, they said, no, what we have here is an equal protection problem. I said, not really. Oh, yes, we do. Voters don't know in which district. They have different standards for allowing their votes to count. Therefore, it violates the Equal Protection Clause. Well, ladies and gentlemen, obviously the facts are different in the Trump case, but it does involve the Equal Protection Clause for the reasons I said. The putative Republican nominee, that is, the man who will be the Republican nominee for president, the Republican Party, Republican donors, Republican members of the Republican Party, and Republican voters are being handicapped. It's not a level playing field. The playing field is unequal, quote unquote, because a state court and a state prosecutor are interfering with the election process. It has nothing to do with the specifics of the conviction. It has everything to do with the fact of a conviction based on the manipulation by the state. Now, does the guy understand what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, right, Mr. Producer?
Mark Levin.
The Great One makes your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Well, I feel exactly the way you do. And we should feel this way. And once we're done feeling this way, we dust ourselves off. We put on the political and legal brass knuckles. And we never say, Uncle. Not now, and not ever. There's been enough talk on TV and radio to make it abundantly clear that we had a crooked judge, a crooked prosecutor, and an overwhelmingly liberal Democrat jury pool. This case should have been dismissed, at least summary judgment. And once that door was open, we knew it would be difficult, didn't we? The judge was handpicked. He's not even a full-fledged permanent judge. He's an acting judge. And this judge has been picked for every Trump-related case in New York City. Every single one. Trump Organization, Bannon, Trump himself. That's not by accident. This judge should have recused himself, but he didn't. We knew that was a problem. He should have moved the venue to a more balanced community when selecting the jury pool, but he wouldn't. We knew that was a problem. He ruled repeatedly for the prosecution and against the defense on material issues. We knew that was a problem. He showed anger toward the defense counsel when they sought to defend their witness and raise substantive issues, and he let the prosecution ramble on and on and on. We knew that was a problem. The jury instructions could have been written by any Marxist, any hanging judge. He gave this jury 100 different ways to convict the former president, and he also withheld critical testimony and information. He interrupted Robert Costello, the key witness, in challenging Cohen. He prevented Brad Smith, one of the nation's experts on the federal election law, from testifying. He allowed in collateral evidence, as we revealed here, that is, evidence that shows, quote-unquote, a pattern, but is not probative. In fact, it is destructive of due process. When Trump says he's an innocent man, this was rigged, he's correct. You really don't need me or any lawyers to tell you how corrupt this is. But in the end, we need to rally to the cause. Does this not underscore the point that we must win this election? Does this not underscore the point that we must put people in positions of power who love the country, who will follow the rule of law, the Constitution, and our traditions? Does this not underscore the point? What happens if we don't win the next election? This is an election between good and evil, between right and wrong, between justice and injustice. Democrats are giddy with joy. Their goal is to imprison Donald Trump. They've interfered with the election process. They form shopped. They found the city. They found the prosecutor. They found the judge. And they got their jury. Now, this will have consequences, enormous, grave consequences. First of all, it will embolden more of these Democrat judges, both in Fulton County, Washington, D.C., Chutkan. They're going to feel righteous. They're going to feel that they have to stand between the country and Hitler. They're going to feel that they have an obligation as a judge to deliver a Biden victory. And in order to deliver a Biden victory, you must twist the law. You must use your power as a judge to pave the way for the prosecutors. You don't charge a former president who's running for president with cockamamie, fictionalized crimes. We talked about that many, many times, didn't we? So what does Trump do? Well, I have a view. It's a little complicated. And it would involve not just the Bush versus Gore decision, but how do you get a case to the Supreme Court from a state trial court? It's not normal. It's not normal. I've been looking at some research done, for instance, at the Yale Law Review. Federal court review by extraordinary writ. They write, to invoke common law writs, that is, not statutory-based writs, but common law-based writs. That is, really, matters of equity, I suppose. As instruments of review, a litigant must show that ordinary channels of appeal offer them no adequate remedy. The appeal may be non-existent. The lower court action may have obstructed it where it is available. Or thirdly, where appeal is available and unobstructed, the lower court's order may be abnormally detrimental to one party. That would seem to fit this case, would it, Mr. Producer? Because it might take 3 months, they say, to get a sentence. But Trump can appeal in 30 days. In my view, I don't know the New York appellate process, but I'm sure there is an emergency process. He should do that. And if the court doesn't rule, and he seeks emergency ruling from the highest court in New York, and they don't rule, then he's got a final determination, or it's final enough. He can certainly make a strong or colorable argument to try and get to the Supreme Court. That said, what's extraordinary here is we're in the middle of a general election, and the issues raised are jurisdictional issues at the heart of this. How does a state court and a state prosecutor use a federal law, a federal election law, not defined, to affect a federal presidential election? And you need to keep something in mind. The issue is we the people. It's our election. We're the voters. It's our election. We're the voters. So this is really an attack on us. Donald Trump for 6 weeks was unable to campaign. He was unable to speak to us directly because of this, not only being stuck in court, but this horrendous gag order. That was intentional. Unable to do rallies on Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, and also mostly Wednesdays because he had to get back to court. Substantial redirection of resources to legal expenses away from campaign ads and other campaign activities. In other words, he is and has been unable to run a routine, normal presidential campaign. First time in American history. Why? Because of this lawfare. Because of this lawfare. So I mentioned that to you. I've talked about Bush versus Gore because I believe substantively that's important, the Equal Protection Clause. But the question is, it's difficult, it's doable. How do you get to the U.S. Supreme Court? And they're going to have to think about that because The way I would do it is I would obviously point out that this was what I will call the reverse federalism, where a state court assumed authority over federal issues, is impacting a federal election, a presidential election, the choice of the most powerful official in the United States, a choice of one of the three branches of the federal government. The question is whether you leave that to states and to their courts and to a DA. Now, the court's instructions allowed the jury to convict Donald Trump for concealing a non-crime. The court allowed the jury to convict on any one of three possible predicate crimes without unanimity. So the jury could have convicted the predicate crime of a Federal Campaign Act violation, that is the payment of monies to Stormy Daniels. This alleged crime was committed, if at all, prior to the entry of the allegedly false business records. Bragg stated in his April 4, 2023 press conference, announcing an indictment, a total of 34 false entries were made in New York business records to conceal the initial covert $130,000 payment. So while the New York criminal statute requires that the state must prove the intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof, the alleged federal election crime was already committed. So I'm not saying it was a crime, but under their theory. So the business record entry could not have been to commit a federal offense or to aid the commission of a crime. It could have only been to conceal that crime in and of itself, if you follow the logic. But the jury was told that the state need not prove that the other crime was in fact committed. So the jury was empowered to convict Trump of intending to conceal an act that was not a crime. Trump wanted to keep quiet something that he had every right to keep quiet. And the list of horribles goes on and on and on. Yes, the issue isn't whether there is reversible error here. Many of us think there is. I have no idea what these judges in the state lineup will do. But the question is even bigger. Because now we have a DA and an acting state judge who've impacted a federal election, a federal campaign, to the detriment of the voters. By placing a scarlet letter on President Trump, which was the intention all along. Do you leave that to the state court process to decide? Do you hope that you'll get a good appellate decision? Or do you try and take it out of that jurisdiction that shouldn't have it in the first place? And how do you do it?
Mark Levin.
We're giving you nothing but the best of Mark Levin.
Got a lot of people emailing me, texting me. I get it. I understand you want some kind of positive, some kind of a positive something to hold on to. And the positive something to hold on to is, it's up to us. I know half the country's nuts. But if we turn out more of us than they do of them, that is, more people who believe in liberty than in tyranny, that'll make a difference. That's the truth. And let's see here. If I were making a substantive argument, I would make it on the basic violation of due process rights to the Supreme Court, that it should assume jurisdiction, should also consider other issues that relate directly to exposing what the prosecutor and trial judge have done, but even more than that, the effect it has on the voters and on the electoral process. But I do worry the court will say, geez, we don't want to get involved in this. We have a non-violent, non-shooting civil war going on in this country. I mean, they're even trying to take out Alito right now. They took a run at Clarence. Before that, they took a run at Neal. Before that, again, they took a run at Clarence. Geez. There is that. There's definitely that. We didn't listen to Bragg, but I'm told basically he wrapped himself in the jury spoke and justice was done and everybody has to be held to account. That his office even quotes Thomas Dewey, for God's sake, so it's all quite political and purposely so. So you do have that, which is nothing. But he wasn't up there very long either, I might add. He wasn't up there very long. So there are legal issues that need to be explored. He's got very good lawyers. Despite what took place, it was not due to them. It was due to a corrupt system. And he'll have the best appellate lawyers, I'm sure, providing advice and taking a look at these various possibilities. They also have to take something into consideration, which is what is politically propitious. Because after all, at the end of the day, the goal is to win the presidency. Now, what kicks in here, should I even bring this up now? I guess I will, Mr. Producer. What kicks in here is this. And it's not something I think Donald Trump should really get involved in, but I'll speak about it. Can a president pardon himself in relation to a state holding? Now, you know my position on this, and it's absolutely. And why is that? You see, what's interesting to me is you have lawyers talking about filing an appeal. Okay, he wins the presidency. In the case, the appeals are still going on. The Supreme Court says no. The state courts will not grant expedited emergency review. He gets elected president, and there they are hanging out there. According to the United States Department of Justice, when it comes to a federal matter, you cannot indict a sitting president. Okay, you'll say, well, he wasn't indicted when he was a sitting president. But the rationale is you can't decapitate a third of the government. He is the executive branch. Well, he's spending time on this. But I would argue further. You cannot have the top federal official in the land subjected to determinations made by state officials. By state officials. And so this raises a lot of complications, what happened here. And so what I'm saying is, at least thinking this through with you out loud, I feel an effort should be made to give the Supreme Court an opportunity to address this. They may not accept it, but to have an opportunity to try and nip this in the bud, as they say. Because it does raise those questions. Look, everybody who's a serious person who loves this country, who's worried about the judicial system, the justice system, the legal system, is very concerned tonight very concerned. While they're partying at the White House and the DNC, and they're partying in Democrat strongholds all over the country. And that's the problem, isn't it? That's the problem. If you believe the Constitution is invalid because of those who drafted it, adopted it, and ratified it, if you believe America's founding is invalid, or worse, or colonialist and imperialist, if you believe the rule of law doesn't apply to you because of those who made it, and you read American Marxism, it's loaded with examples of this, then this is a good thing, what happened today. If you believe, as they say on MSNBC and CNN, that Donald Trump will destroy democracy, and this is what Biden says, if you believe he's the equivalent of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini wrapped in one, if you believe he'll put people in prison willy-nilly, he'll even kill them, somebody said, then this is a grand old day. This is fantastic. They begin to believe their own lies because it's about power. They're power hungry. And the abuse of power. You know, you can use power in positive ways. The Constitution is a document of power, but limited powers, shared powers, balance of powers, federalism, bicameral Congress. With amendments, a president who can only serve a certain number of years, and so forth and so on. The impeachment clause, just in case clause. The just in case clause. So power can be exercised in a positive way, you know, to protect you from a mob, to protect you from factions, to protect you from whatever it is. Protect your property, your earnings, your family, your physical being. But that same power can also be abused, as it was today and has been for the last 6 weeks. That's a big problem. That's abuse of power. When liberty is used to destroy liberty, when power is used to destroy liberty. That's why the Constitution is such a magnificent document. Those men were debating how to use power to effect how people live in a positive way. How to provide for individual liberty, but on the other hand, to protect the civil society. Boy, did they do a hell of a job. The Democrat Party does not embrace this. They're attacking Supreme Court justices. They're attacking the Electoral College. They're attacking the American citizenry with an open border. They're attacking our very economic system that has created all this prosperity that has improved our lives like no human beings ever before in history, and no human beings anywhere else in the world. They talk about fundamental transformation all the time. Well, obviously, in order to fundamentally transform America, you have to fundamentally transform our justice system, that is our legal system, and you have to fundamentally transform what people can say and how they can think, and that's well underway as well. And evil becomes good, like the Hitler Youth on our college campuses, and good becomes evil. So they attack Netanyahu and the Israeli people who just want to live in peace. Donald Trump fundamentally challenges this. Even the Republican establishment is very uncomfortable with him. The Paul Ryans of the world and others. But for the Democrats, he's kryptonite. Because if he succeeds, they fail, and they fail miserably. Miserably. We now have an election system that is subject to what a local district attorney and an acting state judge might decide to do. They usurped federal jurisdiction. They're interfering with a presidential election as I speak. If the Supreme Court of the United States is to act, it would act now. And I don't mean this minute. I mean, if it doesn't act here, what's the point? And so we have to find ways, avenues, in my view, to get it to the court. And if they don't take it, so be it. Or if they rule the wrong way, fine, it's over. But you cannot leave it to the state and hope for the best. That's not to say an appellate court won't do the right thing, but it may not do the right thing in the right amount of time. Or maybe it'll do half the right thing. I don't know.